turn off your cell phones. And yeah, no, I probably won't remind you to turn them on. I'll forget. The Open Circle mission statement. Open Circle provides a supportive environment to gather for social interaction and to improve our understanding of ourselves, our community, and our world. Presentations span a wide range of intellectual, cultural, physical, and spiritual topics. We do not necessarily agree with the ideas and philosophies of our presenters. We encourage you to listen with an open mind and form your own opinions, and leave us alone if you have any disagreements. That's the really important thing. We put all that other stuff on top just to be able to say that thing. Anybody here for the first time? Oh, great. Want to stand, say your name and where you're from? Yeah, I say that part after we raise your hand. Oh, great. Okay. Wonderful. Nice to have you here. Yes. Oh, you must be on vacation. You don't know where you're from. Where are you from? Canada. Nice to have you here. Yeah. Oh, the Garden of Dreams. Okay. Yes.
Palm Springs, California.
What's your name?
Alex.
Alex. Hi, Alex from California. Nice to have you here. Who else? Yes.
But I want to see if there's another Mexican here.
Isaiah, there's usually some Mexicans here. Nice to have you here. Please tell if you know anybody else. We'd like to get as many Mexicans here as we can. Eventually, our intention is to have screens that are live translating, so that we can also have presentations in Spanish that will be live translated into English, and presentations in English live translated into Spanish. So that's a real goal for us. So the more you give on your donations, which is going to be in a couple minutes, the more closer we get to that. Anybody else here for the first time? Okay. Anybody else chicken? Oh, yes. I'm sorry, you're not chicken. I didn't mean to imply. Yes. You're from Oregon? And your name again? Deborah. Nice to have you here. And one more. Hi. Adriana from Colorado? Woo! We've got people that like Colorado here. Yes.
Marcy Weiland from Wisconsin.
Okay. Hi, Wisconsin. I think it's cold. Yeah. Okay, come on. From Minnesota. And your name? From Minnesota. Rita. Nice to have you here. Okay. Oh, Jesus. What, nobody's here for the second time?
Sorry to bother you. I'm Charles from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas.
Oh, hi, Charles from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. Okay. I can move. Yeah, okay. So, if you're not on our mailing list and would like to be so, you can go to opencircle.com. You can also come into the Lake Chapala website and do so. If you do, you'll look for this emblem, kind of click on that, and that'll take you into the Open Circle world, and you can sign up. If you're not getting your emails and you are on the list, check your spam folder, and don't talk to me about it because I don't know a thing about it, but there might be somebody here once in a while that does. Today it would be Steve. Videos. So we video all the talks, and they take about 2 to 3 weeks to show up on the site. We have a YouTube channel, but again, you can just go right into the Lake Chapala Society or right into Open Circle and click on it, and it'll take you into the videos. People like to send them back home, some just to show them how beautiful it is when they're sitting in the snow back home. You know, it isn't even the quality of the talk, but they just like to do that. We're always looking for presenters for Open Circle. So if any of you have an idea, something you're passionate about, would enjoy sharing with others, can speak halfway decently, and I always like to put this in that other people think you're interesting. I think is important, not just you. Please speak to today, Steve would speak to Steve, and it might take a long time to get on the calendar, so even if you're contemplating it, you might want to just start the process. You can always pull back before you're actually on the calendar. I have some announcements to make. We are looking for people to help us with Open Circle. Some of the things we're looking for is we are looking for a hostess to do the coffee and maybe to do a little cookie or something thing. So if you might be interested, your proclivities go towards food and coffee and being social, we'd love to, you can speak to me actually about that if you're interested. We're also looking for an editor for our video. You can either be the one that takes the video or the one that edits it and puts it up on the web. We're also looking for a development director. That is for all of the Lake Chapala Society. That is a paid job, so if you're interested, you would speak to Steve. I don't know what the hell they do, but he'll help. Let's see. We also have Concerts in the Parks is presenting Gladys Knight Tribute with Lauren Jade. That's this Monday, that's tomorrow at 5 o'clock. We have VIP seating for 500 pesos and general seating for 350. That'll be over there. If you haven't attended, it's really wonderful. It's a tribute to Gladys Knight, performed by Lauren Jade. It's a journey I love this description, it's a journey that speaks to the inner depths of those who encounter it with vulnerability and truth. She takes you through being in love for the very first time and also experiencing heartbreak. A story that intertwines with the musical catalog that Gladys Knight has written and produced throughout her career. Lauren Jade's infectious and warm personality will have you none other than mesmerized when she becomes authentic, truthful, and intimate with her audience, each and every single time she sings. So it'd be wonderful to have you here for that. Tickets are available. You can get them probably at the door. Yes, you can get them at the door. You can get them at the office tomorrow. We're also doing a wine pairing experience with Cuisinart, the restaurant. If you haven't eaten there, I highly recommend it. The food's so dang good. The burgers are the best. Anyway, April 21st, 5 o'clock. It's going to, there'll be 5 o'clock, 6 wines from Guanajuato will be paired with delicious 4-course meal prepared by Chef Wally, who's the proprietor of Cuisinart. Together with a licensed sommelier, you will be introduced to some of the best wines Guanajuato offers. Participation is limited to 30 guests to retain the exclusivity and personal attention of each pairing guest. The cost is 1,200 pesos per person, and you can buy your tickets, I assume, at the office. Yes. So we've never done that, and that's to benefit the Lake Chapala Society. Also, we have this gala concert of the mariachis coming. The mariachi performance here, which is the gala performance, is April 14th. What's going to happen before that is mariachi musicians are going to gather from all over Mexico for a 3-day conference. And then they're going to hold their gala here, which then we get to be part of. On the main stage, or on the high performance, is the female mariachis from Guadalajara, who are at this point kind of world-renowned. So we have an opportunity living in our little community to be part of this. It's at 6 o'clock, April 14th, and it's 500 pesos, and there'll be a cash bar available, and that will be over there as well. So that's a pretty cool opportunity. And the money is to benefit the newly formed mariachi school that's here. Not here, but here in Lakeside. So we'd love to have you show up for that. It's a blast. It's really a blast, like literally. So this is the part where you can still help the Lake Chapala Society do all the beautiful things it does. So if you would share your money, I will share my jokes. If the jokes aren't funny, don't hold it against the money giving. Because we don't want to go minus. Nobody taking the money out of the basket. The ability to speak several languages is an asset, but the ability to keep your mouth shut in any language is priceless. Okay? In the 1980s, A&W, do you all know what A&W root beer is? Yeah, the A&W, okay. In the 1980s, A&W tried to compete, this is a true story. In the 1980s, A&W tried to compete with the McDonald's Quarter Pounder by selling a 1/3 pound burger at a lower cost. The product failed. Can you guess why? Because most customers thought the Quarter Pounder was bigger. This is why I don't argue online. nuns die in a car crash and find themselves at the pearly gates. St. Peter tells them they must each answer a question to get in. St. Peter to the first nun. What was the name of the first man? First nun. Gee, that's an easy one, Adam. And the bells ring and the birds sing and the gates of heaven swing open. St. Peter to the second nun. What was the name of the first woman? Second nun. Gee, that's an easy one. Eve. And the bells ring and the birds sing and the gates of heaven swing open. St. Peter to the third nun. What was the first thing that the first woman said to the first man? The nun is stunned. She searches her memory to no avail. Finally she says, gee, that's a hard one. And the bells ring and the birds sing and the gates of heaven swing open. A father puts his 3-year-old daughter to bed. His daughter wanted to say a prayer before sleeping, so the father listened. God bless Mommy, God bless Daddy, God bless Grandma, goodbye Grandpa. The father said, why did you say goodbye Grandpa? The little girl said, I don't know, it just seemed like the right thing to say. The next morning the family received news that the grandfather had indeed died. The father thought it was just a very unfortunate coincidence. A few months later he tucked his daughter into bed and she said a prayer. God bless Mommy, God bless Daddy, goodbye Grandma. And of course the next day the grandmother died. The father realized that his daughter could predict the family deaths, and this was no coincidence at all. A few weeks later, he tucked his daughter into bed, and a prayer went, God bless Mommy and goodbye Daddy. Her father went into shock. He stayed up all night waiting for the worst, and then sunrise came. He decided just to stay at work the entire day to be safe. He stayed at his office until midnight. When it did, nothing happened. He breathed a sigh of relief. When he came home, his wife asked why he was home so late. He said, oh, I had the worst day of my life. If you think your day was hard, she said, you won't believe what happened to me. My boss died in the middle of a meeting. Just saying. Do we have all your money? We do. Thank you for your donation. It's so appreciated and so well used. Words of wisdom for today. These are from Mother Teresa. I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. Love that. Thought that was fitting with our talk today. Next week's presentation, The Heart of the Matter, presented by Dr. Kelly Randolph Bennett. Easter is a celebration of unrestricted life. Intuition challenges us to consider the endless continuity and creative power of life energy, much greater than our own experience. The heart is the place for truth and timing. Non-truths that we hold to be true assault the heart, filtering and limiting essential life energy to the body. The intuition speaks from the heart. Health of the body depends on the authority given the heart's message of truth and timing. How strongly is your intent focused on your wholeness and personal transformation? The authority and health of the heart depend on the health of the mind. Are there things you know that you would rather not hear? Health of mind depends on openness, alert listening, awareness, and choice. That's going to be in the talk next week. Who the hell knows what that means? But it could be great. I've actually heard him speak before. It's good. This week's presentation, Herstories, presented by David Ellison. I think last time he spoke, we were like, oh my God, this is so good. So maybe he'll be good today, maybe he won't. Sorry, I don't want to bring the expectations up so high. And you're like, oh, well, not that good. Dave's teachers had convinced him that he hated history. Once he got out of their clutches, though, he learned that he actually loved it and ended up teaching it for 36 years. He did not instruct the way they did. As Dave continued his learning, the best way to learn is to teach, he discovered more and more fascinating and incredibly inspiring women who had never made the textbooks. Duh, the textbooks had been written by men. Dave felt cheated and vowed not to similarly let his students down. In this engaging and hopefully memorable talk, he's a raconteur, Dave will share his favorite women heroes. David Ellison is an Ohio native, but he escaped. Jay was a San Francisco Bay Area educator, teacher, mentor, teacher, administrator, and wrote an educated column for the local newspaper. He retired Lakeside 3 years ago and enjoys reading, writing, kayaking, acting, and telling great stories. I don't know if he's single, but that sounds like, if anybody's interested. Anyway, his book, Mexican Streets, Tales of Tragedy and Triumph, will be published this month. That's so exciting. Will be published today? It's out. It's published now. He'll talk about it. Join me in welcoming David Ellison.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me easily? Good. For all these years I taught, and my students were captive. Oops, no. My students were a captive audience. They had to be there. So it's a pleasure to be with people who came willingly. So first of all, this talk came out of my last talk. Pull out my light a little bit better. All right, thank you. My last talk in the follow-up discussion, someone said, "Hey Dave, why don't you do a talk on women in history?" And the rest is history. Here I am. I'm just wondering if that woman is here today. Oh well. Anyways, history, as you know, is written by the winners and mostly by men. And just a quick example, I want you to think of one of the most famous scientists that ever lived. Who comes to your mind? Einstein, correct? And Einstein won a Nobel Prize. However, there is only one person in human history that won not one, but 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different subjects, physics and chemistry. How many know that person's name? Interesting, it's almost all women. The rest of you, how many have heard of Einstein? And so the question is, why haven't you heard of Marie Curie? Did I say her name right? And it's just an example of, she should be at least as famous as Einstein, but is not. In any event, and I have to tell you that I was speaking with some friends about giving this talk, and one of them said, half jokingly, "Well, isn't it a little presumptuous for you, a man, to give a talk on women in history?" And I just said, well, full of little irony. But just to put everyone at ease, I just thought I am Davida. Your spirit today. Is this better? I think I just offended some people, but I have a habit of doing that. Anyways, although I love history and taught it for many years, I do not have a degree in history. And this is not the list of women in history. This is merely 10 people that I have come across that inspired me. So it's my list. So please, and I had some people saying, "Oh, you have to include so-and-so." So I'm going to miss a lot of people. Please don't be offended at that. This is just, I'm sharing you 10 women that I admire greatly. I entitled this Herstories, and I stole that title from a book, Herstory, Women Who Changed the World by Deborah Orn and Gloria Steinem, which I had on my shelves in my I'm going to begin with someone who appeared in that book. And it is someone that you've heard about, but I want to show you the peculiarities of history, and that is Helen Keller. How many have heard of her? And then think, well, why is she famous? I think it was scarlet fever, she was overcame that, became an author, and so on. Wasn't she amazing? And if that was all she was known for, she would have been very disappointed. And Herstories said, that's not what she wants to be known for. But they suppressed it. So let me just, I have some quotes from her that describe her own transformation. I once believed that we are all masters of our fate, that we could mold our lives into any form we pleased. I had overcome deafness and blindness sufficiently to be happy. And I suppose that anyone could come out victorious if he threw himself valiantly into life's struggle. But as I went more and more about the country, I learned that I spoke with assurance about a subject I knew little about. I forgot that I owed my success partly to the advantages of my birth, that the power to rise in the world is not within the reach of everyone. And then she went on, I was appointed on a commission to investigate the conditions of the blind. For the first time I, who had thought blindness a misfortune beyond human control, found that too much of it was traceable to wrong industrial conditions, often caused by the selfishness and greed of employers. I found that poverty drove women to a life of shame, prostitution, that ended in blindness, caused by syphilis. And then she says, at the time the compliments the press paid me were so generous that I blush to remember them. But now I have come out for socialism, and newspapers remind me in the public that I am blind and deaf and especially liable to error. Once she crossed the line into saying, I'm not a fan of capitalism, oh, do not trust her. Oh, ridiculous press, socially blind and deaf. It defends an intolerable system, a system that is the cause of much of the physical blindness and deafness which we are trying to prevent. Then she went on, the few own the many because they possess the means of livelihood of all. The country is governed for the richest, for the corporations, the bankers, the land speculators, and for the exploiters of labor. The majority of mankind are working people. So long as their fair demands, the ownership and control of their livelihoods are set as naught, we have neither men's rights nor women's rights. The majority of mankind is ground down by the industrial oppression in order that the small remnant may live in ease. She also became a pacifist. The only moral virtue of war is that it compels the capitalist system to look itself in the face and admit it is a fraud. It compels the present society to admit it has no morals, it will not sacrifice for gain. All of that got suppressed. Such is history. She's number one. I'm doing 10, so I'll let you know how we're doing. Number 2, Tanya Chernova. I learned about her when I read a book called Enemy at the Gates, The Battle for Stalingrad by William Craig. How many have heard of the Battle of Gettysburg? Battle of Stalingrad? A few. The difference is Battle of Gettysburg, bloodiest battle in U.S. history, 50,000 casualties. Battle of Stalingrad, 1 million. The bloodiest battle in human history. And why was I never taught this? Why is it not in our books? Well, the trouble is it flies in the face of the notion that the United States almost single-handedly with one arm behind our back defeated Hitler. But the truth is it was the Russians who broke the Germans and Hitler's back. We suffered about 300-something thousand casualties in World War II. The Russians, 10 million. In any event, so this battle is not usually taught in U.S. history classrooms, but this book is fascinating. And you end up just with admiration for the soldiers on both sides and an absolute hatred for Hitler and Stalin. But who is Tanya Chernova? She's in one chapter of the book. She was a woman who went to fight for the Russians, and in order to get over into Stalingrad, you had to take a boat across the Volga River. And the Stukas were just coming down and just strafing all those boats. So she went to get on the boat, and everyone said, oh, you're a woman. Why don't you sit in the center of the boat so you'll be safe in case the Stukas come and strafe us? And she said, F you. And she went and she sat on the gunwale on the very edge of the boat to just like in your face, I will not get special treatment. Well, sure enough, the Stuka came, it dropped a bomb. And it blew the boat to smithereens. And she was saved because she was sitting on the edge of the boat. She was blown free. She and 4 survivors made it to the Stalingrad side. And they didn't know, well, is this the Russian or the German side? They didn't know. There was a raw sewage sewer there. They crawled into it, and I'm talking human sewage. They crawled into it. 2 of the soldiers were asphyxiated. Only one survived with her. They crawl into it. She crawls up to a manhole cover, pulls it across, and looks and goes, oh darn, we're behind enemy lines. but it was smack dab in the middle of the German mess where they were all eating. She turned to the guy and said, "Follow me." They just got out, got in line, grabbed a plate because they hadn't eaten in days. They were waiting in line. No one noticed they were Russians because they were so covered in filth. No one recognized their uniforms. And, you know, some captain comes over and goes, "Don't cough," and he gets them away out of line. They go and they enjoy their dinner, and then they snuck across the lines. She became a sniper, one of the finest. In fact, she became the lover of the greatest Russian sniper who trained all the snipers. And she rose to become a leader of a sniper team. That's how good she was. And a very famous anecdote, one day they were stationed in this plaza and out walked the Germans, they're sitting ducks. And her lover, commander, said, "Hold your fire." She said, "What? They're sitting ducks." She turned to her people and said, "Take them down." Well, they did, and that's when the tank turned the corner and took out half her team. And afterwards she went to her lover and said, "I'm so sorry." He was furious. He said, "I don't always have the time to tell you the reason why, but you've got to follow orders." They remained lovers, but they were both injured severely, and then they were separated and lost contact with each other. They went on, believing that the other had died, they went on to remarry. And then they learned about each other afterwards, but they never stopped loving each other. In any event, they made a movie called Enemy at the Gates. I love this book. I couldn't wait to go see this movie. I was front and center with my popcorn, and I thought, you know, Tanya Chernova, I mean, what an amazing role model for the young women of this courageous, feisty, talented woman. The movie made her into a librarian. I mean, I wanted to throw something at the screen. I thought, well, I can guarantee you this. It wasn't a woman who wrote that screenplay. So I don't know why this amazing woman became a librarian for the movie. Pisses me off. Let's talk about something else that pisses me off. How many have heard of Rosa Parks? How many have heard of Claudette Colvin? All right, ready to be upset? Here it comes. Claudette Colvin, at the age of 15, 9 months before Rosa Parks, refused to give up her seat. And she was arrested, went to jail, same thing. She became a part of a Supreme Court case that wound its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. Now, 9 months later, Rosa Parks also refuses to give up her seat. That sparks the bus boycotts. Okay, who went down in history? Why didn't Claudette Colvin go down in history? Especially since it was not the boycott that ended the segregation. It was the Supreme Court judgment that Claudette Colvin's case had won that won the day for the segregated buses, not the boycott. So I ask you, who should have gone down in history? Nothing against Rosa Parks, but the trouble was Claudette Colvin was an unwed mother, was not deemed a proper hero, and so she was written out of history. Anyways, I just read a quote from her. She said, "I feel very, very proud of what I did. I do not feel like what I did was I do feel like what I did was a spark, and it caught on." Oh no, I missed a better quote. "History kept me stuck to my seat. I felt the hand of Harriet Tubman pushing down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth pushing down on the other. She shouted that her constitutional rights were being violated. And she said, I made a personal statement, and mine was the first cry for justice, a loud one." And she said, "I'm not disappointed that she was written out of history. Let the people know Rosa Parks was the right person for the boycott, but also let them know that the attorneys took 4 other women to the Supreme Court to challenge the law, and that led to the end of segregation." And I showed my students a video of her. You know, she's an old woman now. I hope she's still alive. She has the most infectious laugh. Just a really happy woman. No bitterness at being written out of history. Number 3, Empress Theodora. How many have heard of her? just a few of you. Prepare to be impressed. Theodora began, she was born into, you know that there were, the Emperor Constantine divided the empire into two, into Rome and Constantinople, which may have spelled their doom because now it was divide and conquer. But Constantinople became the Byzantine Empire, and it survived long after Rome fell. She was born into the Byzantine Empire. Her father was a trainer of a bear in the hippodrome. She became an actress. Now, an actress at that time was a euphemism. Actresses didn't make enough money to make a living, so they had to resort to other things, which she did. And in any event, somehow she met Justinian, who would become the greatest emperor of the Byzantine Empire. Now, I'll leave it to your imagination as to how Justinian met Theodora. She became sort of the Evita Peron of the Byzantine Empire. Justinian was an amazing judge of character, and he said, she's the one for me. Now, there are laws against someone of the nobility marrying into a lower class, let alone a prostitute. So when he was emperor, he just changed the law. And then to everyone's horror, he married her. And by all accounts, they remained faithful to each other to the end of their days. Now, Justinian goes down in history as the greatest of all Byzantine emperors. The first thing he built the Hagia Sophia, that amazing church that is now an amazing mosque. And when he entered it after it had been built, his famous line was Solomon, who built the great synagogue in Jerusalem. He said, Solomon, I have surpassed you. It's just an amazing place. But the other thing he did, he felt God called him to reclaim Rome, because Rome had fallen, and so he spent his career, taking the armies west and trying to get Rome back into the Roman Empire. And he left his wife Theodora in charge. So she ran the empire, and by all accounts, ran it exceedingly well. And as you might imagine, she had a special care for women and for prostitutes. All right, just an amazing woman. Well, the trouble is, Justinian needed a lot of money. He put this one guy in charge who was an expert at raising funds by ruthless manners. And finally there was a revolution of sorts called the Nico Riots. And Constantinople was in chaos, and it looked like all was lost. And so Justinian and his generals said, let's get the heck out of here. Let's get out of here before we're all dead. And Theodora stood up and said, my lords, the present occasion is too serious to allow me to follow the convention that a woman should not speak in a man's council. Those whose interests are threatened by extreme danger should think only of the wisest course of action, not of conventions. In my opinion, flight is not the right course, even if it should bring us to safety. It is impossible for a person, having been born into this world, not to die. But for one who is reigned, it is intolerable to be a fugitive. May I never be deprived of this purple robe, the sign of royalty. And may I never see the day when those who meet me do not call me empress. If you wish to save yourself, my lord, that's her husband, the emperor. If you wish to save yourself, my lord, there is no difficulty. We are rich. Over there is the sea, and yonder are the ships. Yet reflect for a moment whether when you have once escaped to a place of security, you would not gladly exchange such safety for death. As for me, I agree with the adage that royal purple is the noblest shroud. I would rather die today an empress than slink away and be a nobody. Justinian and the generals were shamed. They stood up, they went out, they won the day. Theodora single-handedly saved the Byzantine Empire. Pretty amazing woman. Number 4, how many have heard of Nzinga? All right, Nzinga was born into royalty in what is present-day Angola, Her father, the king, must have noticed something about her because he signed her, a woman, up for military training. And she became an expert with the battle axe and the arrow. And she learned to speak and write Portuguese because the Portuguese were invading. Anyways, her brother became king when the dad died, and he was so sort of threatened by her, he banished her. He turned out to be a really awful ruler. He ended up calling her back and saying, could you negotiate with the Portuguese? She did. She went into the Portuguese governor's office. He kept her waiting for a very long time just to insult her, as in days. She walks in, he's sitting alone, he has removed all the chairs just so that he cannot sit as an equal. It was an insult. So she's standing before him, he's sitting smugly at his chair. She motions to one of her aides and nods, and he knows. He comes over and he goes down on the floor on all fours and sits on his back, then looks at her and says, I sit in your presence. She ended up, for the rest of her life, she led the wars against the Portuguese. First of all, trying to keep them from stealing all their land and trying to end Portuguese slavery. The Africans practiced slavery, but it was a very different kind of slavery. If you lost in battle, you became a slave, but no one ever forgot you were a human being. They always treated you as you're just unlucky, all right? And very often they could earn their freedom back, unlike, I'm sorry. All right. We have a solution. Okay. I'm rubbing it. See how I am? Okay. Anyways, she spent the rest of her life fighting the Portuguese form of slavery where everyone was dying and treated as mere property. And it was, as you know, in the end, a futile fight. But when and she also was fighting for the right of woman to rule. And when she died, they put in her, coffin or whatever, her grave, her battle axe and her arrows as a sign of what a fierce warrior she had been. This is from Wikipedia. Today, she is remembered in Angola as the mother of Angola, the fighter of negotiations and the protector of her people. She is still honored throughout Africa as a remarkable leader and woman for her political and diplomatic acumen, as well as her brilliant military tactics. Nzinga is a leadership role model for all generations of Angola women, and I would say for all women. Women in Angola today display remarkable social independence and are found in the country's army, police force, government, and public and private economic sectors. Thank you, Nzinga. She lives on. Eleanor of Aquitaine. How many have heard of her? I read this book, Eleanor of Aquitaine, A Life by Ellison, and I was just stunned. She lived in the 13th century. She was born into a very wealthy family. Her father owned in France, called Aquitaine. That was the land that she inherited. It was more land than the King of France owned. And her daughter died, and so at the age of 14, she became the most eligible bachelorette probably in world history. And the King of France said, oh, no. He sent his army and surrounded her castle and said, you will marry my son. Well, the trouble is, his oldest son, the strapping, warrior guy, sort of like me, and he died. So then it fell to son number 2, who was a monk in a monastery. All he wanted to do was just sit alone in his books and read and write and did not want to be, and so they called him out of the monastery and said, you're going to be king and you're going to marry Theodora. Well, the trouble is Theodora was fun. She loved to dance and drink and have a great time, and she married this dour monk. It was not a marriage, it was not a very good marriage. Her husband, Louis, went off on the Second Crusade. Said, you stay home and, try to behave. Well, they didn't get very far. Who shows up in camp on a horse in full battle gear. Eleanor of Aquitaine goes, no, 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 no. And she joins in all the military deliberations. He refused to listen to anything she said, although modern day military historians agree her advice was correct. It was such an awful marriage, you know, she said this cannot continue, but not a time of divorce, and if she divorces, she loses all her land. But she's too smart for that. She goes to the Pope and finagles an annulment. So they were never married. She gets to keep all of Aquitaine. Sharp woman. Then she marries King Henry of England. And they got along better. He was sort of fun, loved to have a good time, except he was not faithful to her. Oh no, you do not cheat on Theodora. Now she had many children, one of them being King Arthur, not Arthur, Richard, the Lionheart, and the other being John. So she was the son of two kings. Eventually John sided with King Henry, and Richard sided with his mom, and Eleanor and Richard conspired to overthrow her husband and install him on the throne. Didn't work, and so King Henry threw her into prison for 16 years. And by the way, there's a great movie about this called Lion in Winter. It stars Katharine Hepburn as Theodora, Peter O'Toole as Henry, what did I say? Eleanor, sorry about that. Peter O'Toole, and I'm missing the third guy who plays Arthur, and Timothy Dalton plays the Prince of France, which is important because here's the trouble. Get my people right. Richard was gay, and she said, "You've got to marry." And he said, "But mother, you know." And she said, "You're a king. You have to get an heir, or your brother John is going to win. All right, you've got to get married." Well, she went and found him a bride. I think it was from Italy. She crossed the Alps in the middle of the winter, dragging this woman behind, and said, "You will marry her." Well, he was obedient, and he did. But unfortunately, they never had a son. And he went off to the Third Crusade. On his way back, he was kidnapped. John did everything he could to make sure he never got home. Eleanor did everything she could, got him released, but then he took an arrow to the chest, it became infected, and he died. And evil brother John did in fact become king. But it doesn't change Eleanor. Eleanor, at a time when women were expected to be nobody, she essentially ruled the world and on her terms and installed kings. She was a kingmaker. Anyways, let's go on to number 7. I think I'm doing well in terms of time. I'll make it, I think. This comes from my book club. I'm part of the nonfiction book club here. I would urge all of you to join. The books we've read are fantastic. Almost all the women in the book club, almost all the members of the book club are women. So we end up reading a lot about women. And man, have I read about some amazing women. I'm so grateful to this club and for what they have introduced me to. I mean, the one book we read is about a woman named Virginia Hall. It's called A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II by Sonia Purnell. When she was very young, she pretty much shot off her foot in a hunting accident. So, unlucky woman. She decided she wanted to work for the US State Department, who pretty much said, "You're a woman." No. And so she was very frustrated. She was over in England, and she ended up having, if I remember correctly, she was at a cafe, had coffee, which, unbeknownst to her, was one of the British spy masters. He had coffee with her and said, he said, "You and I need to talk." And so the British recruited her to fly into occupied France and become a spy and organize all the French resistance. Now, she was expected to answer to the men, of course, who were leading the spy movement there. They were all blame idiots. But the French increasingly kept deferring to her. and saying, she's the one that we want to follow. Let's just see. She supplied arms, training, direction to the French resistant groups, became an expert at support operation, organizing resistant movements, supplying agents with money, weapons, and supplies, helping downed airmen to escape, offering safe houses and medical assistance to wounded agents and pilots. And then she organized the greatest escape from a Gestapo prison ever, where they infiltrated it and got 10 people out that were facing execution. After which the Gestapo said of her, she is, quote, the most dangerous of all Allied spies. Her movement was infiltrated by a Catholic priest who turned over most of the people she had trained and operated, and then she had to witness as they were one by one arrested, tortured, and murdered. She escaped across the Pyrenees in the middle of winter with her prosthetic leg, with blood dripping down her leg. She got out, got back to England. She said, like Harriet Tubman, I need to go back. And they said, you're nuts. We will not send you back. She went to the United States. They sent her back. So then she became an American spy and continued her work there. She filed her teeth down and went back dressed as an old woman and continued to escape the Gestapo. How? I mean, she had a limp. They knew they were looking for a woman with a limp. How did she survive? I don't know. After the war, the CIA hired her where, let's just see, quote, she felt she had been sidelined, shunted into backwater accounts because she had so much experience that overshadowed her male colleagues who felt threatened by her, and her experience and abilities were never properly utilized. And so this is a case where sexism worked against the United States. We probably had the best spy on the planet working for us, and we gave her a desk job. Her name was Virginia Hall, and the book was called A Woman of No Importance. There are now 2 movies out about her. I saw one of them, and my mom always warned me, watch the movie first, then read the book. I made the mistake. I read the book, couldn't wait to watch the movie. I'm like, where's the excitement? You know, where's the sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for her to die? You know, it just didn't do it justice. Read the book. All right, another book we read is a woman by the name of Gertrude Bell. Anyone heard of her? A few. I was part of the members of the book club. It's called Gertrude Bell, Queen of the Desert, Shaper of Nations, by Georgina Howell. And her list of accomplishments, it's sort of, she defies superlative. She went to Oxford and became the first woman in history to earn a first, which I guess is sort of summa cum laude. I mean, sort of top of her class. No one had ever done that before, a woman. It was sort of like, who is this woman? Then she became fascinated by the Mideast and Arabia. She learned Persian and Arabic. And then she translated, this is when she was in her early 20s, she translated the poems of Hafiz into English to wild acclaim. They said these poems are among the most obscure and lyrical and difficult, and she did it. How did she do this? I mean, that's enough to say, okay, I can die now. I mean, I've accomplished enough for one life. Then she became a world-acclaimed mountain climber. She was reputed to be among the finest on the planet, scaling alongside the best climbers on Earth. You read the book how she spent 48 hours dangling in a rope in the middle of a blizzard, should have died, manages to survive, and then goes right back up and says, no, I'm getting to the top of that mountain. All right, then she went to Arabia and became a traveler. And she usually traveled alone. Now, by alone, I don't mean all by herself. She would hire porters and other things to carry all her stuff. But there was no man there guiding her, no one else. She traveled alone. And she went where no one else dared to go, repeatedly, again and again. And everywhere she went, she became a cartographer, one of the world's best, an archaeologist, because she'd see these ruins, and she photographed them and then described them and published her books. She became a travel writer, and let me just read just one little passage, because I wish I could write like this. Before we had gone far, with a flash and a sudden glitter, the sun leapt up above the show peaks, and day rushed across the plain. A stony valley led us to the heart of desolation and the end of all things. Oh, man. Anyways, when World War I came about, we had the front in the Mideast and the end of the Ottoman Empire. But most of the British didn't know anything. There was one woman who knew everything. She knew all the maps because she had made them. And she had met all the chieftains scattered about. She knew them all. They promoted her to major, and she became the chief advisor to the British during the entire war. And then after the war, she became the chief negotiator as they divvied everything up. And she was struggling. The British never really wanted it. They said, yes, fight for us and we'll give you your independence. Liar, liar, pants on fire. And she knew it. And so she had to sort of lie to all these people she loved while she was trying to undermine the British to try to get them independence. In the end, she almost single-handedly installed King Faisal in Arabia, who ruled exceptionally well for decades. This was a woman, this one biographer said, she was, I think, the greatest woman of our time, perhaps among the greatest of all time. Gertrude Bell. All right, now we're going to get, oops, I've got two more to give you, and I think I'll make it. These come from my book that just launched today. It's called Mexican Streets, Tales of Tragedy and Triumph. And it's Mexican history for expats. Lots of little short stories about each of the street names, but I've put them in chronological order. So you can just walk across a street and say, who the heck was that? And look it up in the index of my book. Or you can start at page 1 and get an introduction to all of Mexican history. As I did my research, there were two women who just, similar to all these other women, I just went, oh my God. First one is a woman by the name of Ermina Galindo. Anyone hear of her? Ermina Galindo. She's sort of the reincarnation of Susan B. Anthony, Janet Rankin, and Margaret Sanger, all rolled into one. At the age of 15, she got involved politically. She gave the speech welcoming the revolutionary Carranza into Mexico City. He was sort of the last man standing, and he recognized her, that her talents made her his private secretary and his representative to Cuba and Colombia. She wrote several books praising her until she, like everyone else, became completely disillusioned with him. But oh, she was only just beginning. It was also, it was her lifelong campaign, I'm going to read from my book, it was her lifelong campaign to secure women's rights that Galindo shone in her own right. Also at 15, she published a groundbreaking, controversial magazine, The Modern Woman. This is in Mexico, in which she wrote, quote, "A wife has no rights in her home. She is excluded from participating in any public matter and lacks the legal personality to enter into any contract. She cannot dispose of her personal belongings or even manage them, and she is legally disqualified from defending herself against mismanagement of her estate by her husband." We'll move on because I know it's late. The following year, Galindo crafted a document for the first Mexican Feminist Congress entitled Women in the Future. It brought down the House with its radical notions that women needed to free themselves from church oppression. And they deserved complete equality with men, including secular education as well as sex education. It criticized both male hypocrisy and machismo, today known as toxic masculinity. Most women were scandalized by her. Undeterred, she introduced a proposal for the new Constitution of 1917 calling for women's suffrage. When it was rejected for the new Constitution, no problem, she merely ran illegally for Congress, becoming the first Mexican woman to both run for and win a national election. But the Electoral College overruled it because she was a woman. Later on, well, she was instrumental in getting an amendment to the Mexican Constitution that allowed for women's suffrage. She became the first woman ever congressman in Mexico. It's just an amazing woman. Her name is Hermina Galindo. Her visage is now on the new 1,000 peso bill. She's finally getting her due. And I'll end with one of my favorites. Of course, they're all my favorites. Juana Inés de la Cruz. How many have heard of her? She reminds me of, what is it, Gertrude Bell. She was an illegitimate child, and what was far worse, a woman. Even so, she emerged as the greatest American intellect of the 17th century. She could read and write by the age of 3. I think by 5 she could read and write Latin. At 16, she begged and masqueraded as a man to attend university, but had to continue to educate herself. She became a lady-in-waiting at the court of the colonial viceroy, who was so impressed with her. He, the viceroy, that's the guy who was in charge of all of New Spain, answers only to the king. He convened a panel of, I think, 40 doctors of theology, philosophy, and humanities to test her. So imagine the scene. 40 of the most bright Mexican, doctors of philosophy, and little old Juana de la Cruz, still very young. And several hours, they could not stump her. They were stunned at the depth and level of her knowledge. Citing her total disinclination to marriage and her desire to have no fixed occupation, which might curtail my freedom to study, she left the court for a convent in 1669 and soon distinguished herself as a writer, philosopher, theologian, composer, and poet. Her quarters, housing the continent's largest library, became a meeting place for other artists and intellectuals. And there may have been another reason that Sor Juana de la Cruz chose a life of a nun, her affection for other women. She became the intimate friend of the Marquise de Laguna, extolling her in poetry, quote, "That you're a woman far away is no hindrance to my love, for the soul, as you know, distance and sex don't count." Later, in another poem, "Let my love be ever doomed if guilty in its intent, for loving you is a crime of which I will never repent." And she unabashedly challenged church teaching and argued passionately for the rights of women. Quote, "Who has forbidden women to engage in private and individual studies? Have they not a rational soul as men do? I have this inclination to study, and if it is evil, I am not the one who formed me thus. I was born with it, and with it I shall die." And then later, quote, "Foolish men who accuse women mindlessly, you cannot see you cause what you abuse." Well, her defenders, the Marquis and the Marquise de Laguna, went back to Spain, and now she was defenseless, and the bishop pounced and forced her to cease all her writing, sell all her books and her musical instruments, and to spend the rest of her life making penance for all that she had done. So the bishop silenced her, and she ended up dying, ministering to her fellow nuns during a plague. Today she is featured on the Mexican 100 peso note, and there is an amazing Netflix movie. It's Spanish with subtitles called Juana Inés, not to be missed. It's fabulous. I'm going to add one more thing. My neighbor and friend Linda Rambo said, you have to mention this book called When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone. And I have not read it, so I'm just going to read about it. It says, possibly the most controversial, we have to ban it. Possibly the most controversial debated claim in the book is Stone's interpretation of how peaceful, benevolent matriarchal society and goddess-reverent traditions, including ancient Egypt, were attacked, undermined, and ultimately destroyed almost completely by the ancient tribes, including the Hebrews and later the early Christians. To do this, they attempted to destroy any visible symbol of the sacred feminine, including artwork, sculpture, weavings, and literature. The reason being that they wanted the sacred masculine to become the dominant power and rule over women and goddess energies. According to Stone, the Torah, or Old Testament, was in many ways a male attempt to rewrite the story of human society, changing feminine symbolism to masculine. Man, but things are changing. I mean, I'm just thinking of two recent films. How many saw the film Hidden Figures? That resurrected Katherine Johnson, this amazing mathematician that got John Glenn into the first astronaut to orbit. And the other one was The Imitation Game, which finally took Alan Turing. He's the one who broke the Enigma code, but then they essentially killed him because he was gay. And so finally the British are coming back and saying, what did we do? So in some ways we're getting things right. We're going back and resurrecting the people that we have suppressed. But if you look at what's going on in the United States today, we're quickly swinging far back. So I'm going to read these off. I'll end it with this. I'm going to read off the 10 names. Turn to your partner. Which one impressed you the most? Helen Keller, the sniper Tanya Chernova, Claudette Colvin, who preceded Rosa Parks, the Empress Theodora, Queen Njinga of Angola, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Virginia Hall, the spy master, Gertrude Bell, the shaper of nations in the Mideast, Ermina Galindo, who fought for women's rights here in Mexico, and Juana Inés de la Cruz. Turn to your partner, which one you thought, that's the one I was really impressed with. You've got 30 seconds, go.
I would take Josefa Ortiz Rodriguez.
Okay, I've gone hopelessly overboard, so I think we have time for a few questions, or no? No question. All right, one question. If you go to Facebook, there is the Ahehik Nonfiction Book Club. So that would be one way. The other one is to see me or Ellison. Where are you? She's right over there. She is our directress heir supreme. Go talk to her. We meet once a month. Fabulous books. And I have to say, among the most intellectually stimulating people I've met here at Lakeside. Why? Because they read.
I'm sorry.
It's my fault.
I'm sorry.
One last question.
He blew through it.
I know, I blew through it. Last question. Yes.
Okay. The women that you mentioned, you missed one that we picked.
I missed thousands.
Yeah. So, Josefa Ortiz de Dominguez.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Josefa Ortiz
She's in my book.
She's in
Oh,
your book?
where can we get your book?
She's in my book, featured prominently in my book, and is now available at Amazon. For the next 6 days, the Kindle version is free. So if you go to Amazon, look up Mexican Streets, Tales of Tragedy and Triumph. It's the promotion because I just launched it today. The Kindle version is free, and the paperback and the hardbound coffee table books are available at both Amazon and Amazon MX for cost. So I just put it the lowest price that Amazon would let me sell them. But after 6 days, the price is going up.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so very, very much.